everyone, Instructor Gerber here. I hope that this video lecture finds you well. What I'm going to talk about today is T.S. Eliot's poem, The Hollow Men, and I'm going to model those 5 steps for analysis in the reading on analysis that you all had for today. So we'll start with the poem, a little bit of background about the author, T.S. Eliot, who he is, and then I will read the poem to you, and then I'm going to actually go through and just show you what that process looks like of going through these 5 steps, practicing analysis, and then see if I was going to write a paper on this poem, how could I make those 5 steps useful to me? What could I do to generate ideas for a paper and kind of consolidate things towards a thesis statement and main idea? So let's begin with the author, T.S. Eliot. Some of you may know who he is. He was born in St. Louis, so he's representing those of us who are local to St. Louis. I think that we can be very proud of that. He was writing, well, this particular poem that he wrote, The Hollow Men, he wrote it in between the Great World Wars, so between World War I and World War II. And what do we know about that time period? What do we know about World War I? Well, it was devastating. It changed everything. It changed the way that we understood the world here in America, right? So he's an American writer and kind of thinking about this perspective of we come from this place of having never experienced this kind of total devastation before. And you see that in the writing, not just in T.S. Eliot's writing, although it certainly can be found there in a very glaring way, but also in other writers of this time period. So his contemporaries would be F. Scott Fitzgerald, who wrote The Great Gatsby, Gertrude Stein, she was a poet who wrote a lot about repetition and spoke about that in some very eloquent and fascinating ways. Pablo Picasso, the painter, was also painting during this time period. And what did they all do? Oh, also Hemingway, so the minimalist American short story writer. And what do they all have in common in some way? Well, they broke rules. Absolutely, they broke rules. So a lot of their work stems from the fact that what came before no longer seemed to fit. What came before no longer seemed to make sense anymore because they had witnessed such devastation that no one had seen before. Yes, there had been wars before, but this war was very different because it was fought with machines, with technology. It was very different. Before World War I, war was mainly person-to-person combat. And now in World War I, suddenly there's new technologies, and so the effects were extremely devastating. Gertrude Stein coined the term the lost generation. And that is what this group of poets and artists were known as, the poets and artists of the lost generation. And you see some reoccurring themes in their work of basically the world no longer making sense, things not being okay, trying to heal from that, and really reflections on a cracked and crushed American dream. So before World War I, there was all these ideas, this belief in God that had never really been questioned, belief that everything was going to be okay in the end, belief in family, that there were just certain things that you could count on. But after the devastation of World War I, it was as if the ground had just been ripped out of everyone, right below everybody's feet, and now no one knew what to think anymore. So everyone's just trying to pick up the pieces, trying to pick up these scattered pieces on the ground, and you can really see that in all of their work. T.S. Eliot is known to be one of the founders of modernism. That's an art movement that is known for breaking away from classical or from traditional art forms. You can see this in Pablo Picasso's work as well, right? Cubism, just all the things that he was doing was extraordinarily different than what came before. I mean, before Picasso, most painters were really trying to represent a scene realistically, and Pablo Picasso was not trying to do that at all. And in fact, he was very able to. You can actually go and see some of Picasso's realistic paintings, and he was a good painter. He knew the rules, but then he broke those rules with intention, on purpose, because he wasn't interested in capturing the world for exactly how it looked in front of him. He wanted to do something different. He wanted to turn away from the classical and from the traditional, which is what T.S. Eliot was doing in writing as well. And T.S. Eliot, he's kind of known for being maybe not accessible to some. So if a work is accessible, that means it's like an easy read. T.S. Eliot is known for being dense, for being complicated, for there's a lot of footnotes involved, that kind of thing. So if you're someone who really enjoys researching with a poem, like I do, you might enjoy T.S. Eliot. I don't even want to say that, though, because I think that the thing about T.S. Eliot that I think is so great about T.S. Eliot's work that's so great is the fact that if you want to dig in his poems, you can dig and you will find treasure. But if you don't want to dig, I think that there is a lot to be gleaned just from a surface level reading of his work. So there's the surface level, and then if you want to go deeper, you will be rewarded. But if you just want to read the poem and enjoy it for what it is, then I think that that is just another way of experiencing the poem as well. So that's one thing that I really appreciate personally about T.S. Eliot. Now this poem that I am about to read and analyze here for you, The Hollow Men, this is not his most famous poem. You may or may not have heard of this one. A lot of people really do like it. It's kind of a precursor to his much more famous poem, The Wasteland. So I think that probably his two most famous poems are The Wasteland and The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock. The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock is something pretty different. There are definitely some reoccurring themes, especially of impotence, of just not being able to do something that this person really wants to do. You see that in definitely The Hollow Men and definitely The Wasteland, of just this being unable to speak, being unable to take action. I mean, we see that already in the title of this piece, The Hollow Men. The Hollow Men would not be capable of action. They would not be capable of doing the things that they would want to do. They're just like straw men, but more on that shortly. So The Hollow Men is kind of a precursor to The Wasteland. It's very similar in certain ways. You can see how T.S. Eliot wrote this poem first and then later developed, not this poem exactly, but kind of used this one to set the stage for The Wasteland, which is a lot longer and a lot more complicated, but has very similar themes to this piece. Another thing that T.S. Eliot is known for is his allusion, so his references to other works, which is kind of interesting considering that he is known to be one of the founders of modernism, when modernism is breaking away from the classical and breaking away from tradition. And yet we see Eliot pointing back to these things in order to move away from them in some ways. So there's a lot of references in his work to the Bible, to Dante's Inferno, to Milton, to Homer, to the game of chess, to all different kinds of literary allusion. So allusion would be a reference to something else. So that might be to pay homage to it, or I kind of think of it as, again, just like the hidden treasure in the poem, where if you don't know what that allusion is to, you can still get something from the poem in and of itself. But if you do know, it's another added layer to the poem. So it's something else that's there. All right, so I will read this poem now. The Hollow Men by T.S. Eliot. Mr. Kurtz, he dead. A penny for the old guy. 1. We are the hollow men. We are the stuffed men, leaning together, headpiece filled with straw. Alas, our dried voices, when we whisper together, are quiet and meaningless as wind in dry grass, or rat's feet over broken glass in our dry cellar. Shape without form, shade without color, paralyzed force, gesture without motion. Those who have crossed with direct eyes to death's other kingdom, remember us, if at all, not as lost violent souls, but only as the hollow men, the stuffed men. 2. Eyes I dare not meet in dreams, in death's dream kingdom these do not appear. There, the eyes are sunlight on a broken column. There is a tree swinging, and voices are in the wind singing, more distant and more solemn than a fading star. Let me be no nearer in death's dream kingdom. Let me also wear such deliberate disguises: rat's coat, crow's skin, cross staves in a field, behaving as the wind behaves, no nearer, not that final meeting in the twilight kingdom. 3. This is the dead land. This is cactus land. Here the stone images are raised. Here they receive the supplication of a dead man's hand, under the twinkle of a fading star. It is like this in death's other kingdom, waking alone at the hour when we are trembling with tenderness, lips that would kiss form prayers to broken stone. 4. The eyes are not here. There are no eyes here, in this valley of dying stars, in this hollow valley, this broken jaw of our lost kingdoms. In this last of meeting places, we grope together and avoid speech, gathered on this beach of this tumid river, sightless unless the eyes reappear as the perpetual star multifoliate rose of death's twilight kingdom, the hope only of empty men. 5. Here we go round the prickly pear, prickly pear, prickly pear. Here we go round the prickly pear at 5 o'clock in the morning. Between the idea and the reality, between the motion and the act, falls the shadow. For thine is the kingdom. Between the conception and the creation, between the emotion and the response, falls the shadow. Life is very long. Between the desire and the spasm, between the potency and the existence, between the essence and the descent, falls the shadow. For thine is the kingdom. For thine is. Life is. For thine is the. This is the way the world ends. This is the way the world ends. This is the way the world ends. Not with a bang, but a whimper. All right, so that is The Hollow Men by T.S. Eliot. Just some first impressions that you may have of it or may have noticed right away is first that there is a lot of repetition. And that is kind of why I chose it for this particular exercise, because we're looking for repetition. We're looking for strands. So this piece kind of lends itself to this particular exercise. Gertrude Stein, T.S. Eliot's contemporary, the poet who coins the term the lost generation, she said that there is no such thing as repetition. She talked about relational identity. So this idea that something actually changes based on next to-ness. So a thing is different depending on relational identity. Thinking about our own identity can be a great example of this. So think about how some of you might be a mother, you might also be a sister, you might be a boss, you might be a coworker, you are a student, maybe you own a pet, and so that's a responsibility that you have. So we have all these different, also where you live. You are probably maybe a citizen of the United States of America. You are likely someone who lives in the Midwest, at least right now, while you're going to school here, although maybe not. Maybe you are a citizen of somewhere else. And that would be some way that you might choose to try to define yourself. So if you were to explain who you are, well, I live in New York City, I live in Los Angeles, and we kind of take it for granted that this means something, right? That the place that we live, our environment impacts us in some way. So Gertrude Stein took this kind of idea and applied it to words. So thinking about a poem, like what we're looking at now, and how a particular word can mean a different thing in a different context. Because just the fact, Gertrude Stein said that just the fact that you have already heard the line once makes it different when you hear it a second time, because now it's what she calls insistence. It's no longer that you just said it once, but now you're saying it multiple times. And it's not repetition, because repetition to her was very stagnant. It meant nothing was changing. But she's insisting that something does in fact change. So if someone says something more than once, then now they're placing extra emphasis on it. But also, again, relational identity, the fact that something changes in its identity based on what it is placed next to. So in this case, a line of a poem would change depending on the line before it and the line after it, which to me makes a lot of sense, because we don't live in a vacuum. We are impacted by our environment as well as by our relationships to other people. And with poetry or with writing, with literature, it's kind of the same idea. In an essay, right? If you have a sentence, that sentence might read differently depending on what you wrote before it or what you're going to write after it. Maybe then you would reflect back and read that sentence again, and it might seem different than before. Knowing what we know now, retrospectively, things can seem different. Okay, so that was The Hollow Men by T.S. Eliot. So next, what I'm going to do is just read these 5 steps from the reading on analysis that you all had for one of your readings. And again, I'm just going to go through and model how to do this with a poem, but you can apply this to anything. You can apply it for an essay. If you're writing an analysis of an essay, this is a great way to start. If you are maybe writing, let's just say, an analysis of a documentary, you all have one of those coming up, then this is a great way to start. So it's not the only way to start, but this is one way to start. So begin just by making observations is kind of the idea here. Not making judgments, but just noticing, making observations, making lists, actually checking the number of things so that you can see what is coming up in a repeated way. Because if something is coming up repeatedly, then that means it's probably a pretty important part of the picture. So I'll just read through the steps. Step 1, list all details or words that repeat exactly and the number of repetitions in each. Step 2, list strands, grouping of the same or similar kinds of words or details. For example, polite, courteous, mannerly. So words that they might not be the exact same word, but they kind of mean the same thing. Synonyms. Be able to explain the strands connecting logic. Name it. Think carefully about what goes with what. So the connective tissue between ideas. What is linking them together? What is the common theme? So we're looking at themes here. So you can see that we're starting small, and then we're zooming out and getting a little bit bigger. Taking a look at kind of the bigger picture in these later steps. 3, list organizing contrasts, binary oppositions. For example, open, closed, round, pointed. Start with what's on the page. Gradually move to implied binaries, but stay close to the data. List as many binaries as you can. So binaries mean 2, and it means 2 things that are seen to be opposite of each other. So things that were offered 2 options, a binary. So that could be rich, poor, black, white, good, bad, these kinds of things. Step 4, select and list the 2 most significant repetitions, the 2 most significant strands, and the 2 most significant binaries. So steps 1 through 3, you're going through the work, and I'm going to be highlighting. You're searching for these patterns. You're searching for first repeated words, then words that maybe not they're exactly the same, but they're words that mean similar things, and then contrasting. So words that mean exactly opposite of each other. And now steps 4 and 5 is going back and noticing, making observations about your observations. It's very meta. So noticing which ones of these seem the most significant, and therefore which ones would you maybe want to focus on in your writing. Step 5, select and list the 1 repeated detail or 1 strand or 1 binary that you take to be the most significant for arriving at ideas about what the image communicates. Write 1 paragraph explaining your choice. So basically, this is a pre-writing exercise for analysis. So writing an essay that is analysis. So this is kind of setting you up for the right track. Maybe you already know exactly what you want to write about for a particular essay, and that's great, go for it. But let's say that you're struggling with organizing your ideas or narrowing them down or just finding an idea to begin with. Well, in that case, you'll want to begin with some kind of pre-writing exercise, and this is one really great example of something you could do for that. Something else that you could do would just be free writing, so just writing about your reactions and response to whatever the text is that you're examining. Something that you do need to be careful of with just free writing is a lot of times we'll go into our own personal reflection, like how this impacted me, and we might go down like a rabbit hole of personal narrative or something like that. So if you are writing an analysis, it's really important to stay focused on analyzing the work itself and analyzing that text itself. So this is just like something that you can do to really stay on track with that. And again, I'm going to go ahead and go through these steps now and show you exactly what it looks like. So there's a lot of different ways to do this. Do it however you want. You could just make lists. So you could just have a notebook and like write steps 1 through 5 out and just like fill it down. What I'm going to do is use my handy highlighters here. So I'm color coding, but you could also mark things. Like if you don't have enough different colors of highlighters, you could put like a star next to every time the word kingdom comes up, by example, and put like a dot or a circle next to every time the word eyes comes up, because those are 2 words that came up a lot in this one. A little heart next to the word death. That's a little bit odd, but just whatever works for you. Okay, so I am going to go ahead and speed this up, and I'm going to go through and just highlight these, and I will put it on fast forward while I do that. Okay, I am back, and I will show you my findings. If you want to, also, by the way, feel free to do this activity yourself. So this is not mandatory or required, but I think it's a pretty fun activity, and you can kind of compare and contrast what we found here. So feel free to pause this video and do it yourself if you would like to, and then I will show you what I found. So this is kind of what some of my pages are looking like here by the time that I finish. Just a lot of marking on them, color coding. I did run out of highlighters, so I did some things in highlighting and some things in other markings. You'll see that I put a star next to the word star every time I saw it, because I'm very clever like that. Anytime that I saw the word death, I highlighted it in orange. And words that were similar but not quite death, so those strands, I circled in orange. So we all have to find a system that works for us. That's one that made sense to me, is if it was the exact word death, I would highlight it in orange. And if it was like a word that meant like a synonym to death, so words like dying and dead and so on, then I would circle it. So that way, that's how I kept track of like the strands, while also keeping track of the words themselves. And then I just made a little checklist of how many times each one of those appeared. What else did I do? I circled the word kingdom. I used the word, I used the pink highlighter to highlight the word dreams, the yellow highlighter for the word eyes. I underlined the word hollow whenever it came up, and so on. So when I finished, I tallied them all up, and this is what I found. So first, the repetitions. And something that you can ask yourself is, what is the significance of each one of these? Because for writing, especially for poetry, poetry is really practicing the economy of words. So saying as much as you can in as little of a space as possible. And I would encourage you to do that all the time with your essays, with your writing in general, but it's so much more intense with a poem, because poetry is obviously, in general, shorter than prose. That's something that it often aims for. So the word kingdom I found no less than 9 times. Now the Hollow Men is not the shortest poem ever written, but it's also not that long either. So for a word to repeat 9 times, wow, there must be a meaning for that. So it was in various contexts, kind of shifting in meaning from death's other kingdom, the broken jaw of our lost kingdoms, death's twilight kingdom, death's dream kingdom. So you can see a real theme here. I noticed the word hollow 7 times, including in the title, The Hollow Men. And titles are always important as well. So titles I I think that they carry extra weight because they are our entryway into the poem. They're our first encounter with the poem. So obviously they're important. A lot of people decide if they want to read a poem or another text based on the title. That can be something that really perks our attention. A movie as well, a book as well. Oh, that's an interesting title. Or, ooh, that sounds boring. I don't think I would like to read that. So a lot of thought should go into what a title is. And we know T.S. Eliot to be a very thoughtful writer. So none of this is accidental. That's the thing with analysis. Realize that all of this was hopefully done with intention. Are there some sloppy artists who just kind of throw things together? Of course, yeah. But for the most part, what we know is that poems do not fall from heaven fully formed. Neither do images, neither do any text, right? So a documentary, it doesn't just appear. Someone made it. And what that means is they made a series of choices. Everything about a text is a choice. So the title could have been different. Anything about a text could have been different than what it is. So, for example, a short story. Maybe it's written in present tense, or maybe it's written in past tense. Maybe it was written in present tense in one draft, and then the author decided to change it to past tense. And there's a difference between a story that's told in present tense and a story that's told in past tense. In present tense, I think that something is more immediate because it's happening right now, and we don't even know if the narrator, the person speaking in the short story or novel or whatever it may be, is going to get out okay or not. So we might be a little more pressured and a little more stressed out and worried about this individual. Whereas past tense brings with it more reflection. More, this has already happened, I have survived, I have lived to tell the tale, and now I'm telling that tale. So there's some distance between the events taking place and the vantage point of the narrator who is telling us about those events. So I'm just saying that all of these choices matter. And now I'm talking about a poem and I'm talking about a short story. Those are not things that you have to analyze for this class. But it holds true for any text. It holds true for the documentary. It holds true for the essays that you'll be evaluating, all of those things. They're just examples. Okay, other things that I found here. The word we, I found 7 times. So that's another choice that an author makes is, do I use I, do I use you, do I use he, she, they, we? We is pretty profound, right? That's a community word. That's communal language. So I think about, of course, the chorus in ancient Greek literature. But for this person, it almost seems like I wonder if perhaps the speaker is speaking for the entire generation, for the lost generation, right? This is not I, this is we, this is us. This is a situation that all of us are in. This is the boat that we are in together. And this poem is obviously very depressing. And I think it's a lot of times culturally in our art, our artists are expressing the views, the perspective, and the feelings for so much more, so much of a bigger perspective than just their own, right? Like, have you ever heard a song and thought like, wow, like that so speaks to me. That's exactly how I feel right now, right? So I think that one thing about art that is what makes it, one reason why it's so important is because it's expressing not just the author themselves, but speaking for a lot of times others as well, who may not have a voice or who may just not have really found their voice or found the right words to say what they want to say. So I think it is very impactful that this poem has the word we in it, and so many times. Between 7 times. That also seems really significant to me because it's not here and not there, but it's between, like between destinations. It's almost like being in a hotel room or an airport where you're not there yet. You're not where you came from and you're not where you're going. You're kind of like in the middle, right? It's like being in purgatory in a way, right? It's like, well, the future isn't here, the past is over, and now I'm just like in a waiting room, basically. So this space of being between, of being not this and not that, in the gray area, right? So speaking of binaries, if we're given this option of black or white, the word between is kind of like gray, right? The gray space, the in-between space. So between the idea and the reality, between the motion and the act, between the conception and the creation, between the emotion and the response, between the desire and the spasm, between the potency and the existence, between the essence and the descent. So those were kind of sprinkled up in the last section or last two sections. And I also thought about betweenness between life and death, because the whole poem seems to be really a shadowland, a purgatory, being in limbo. The word eyes I noticed 6 times, which I think the eyes are very significant because they're so representative of knowing, really. So what we see in the world around us, but also I think that the word see can be very metaphorical as well as literal. So what we see, can you not see what's right in front of you? That kind of thing. So like there's the trope of like the blind seer, of course, in a lot of mythology. So can you see what's in front of you, quite literally, quite metaphorically, spiritually, and otherwise? So this idea of seeing. Are you noticing? Are you aware? Are you aware of the way that the world is and what's going on? The word death, just death, so not including dying, dead, 5 times. Dead, 4 times, so that's 9 right there when you add those two together. Dream, 3 times. Shadow, 3 times. Stars, 4 times. And one thing about the stars that seems significant to me is that they are a key kind of letting us know this is nighttime. They're signifying it is not daytime, it's nighttime. So everything is dark. We're in darkness. And there was always a modifier before star, so fading star, dying star, and it changes in meaning from hopeful to despair. Okay, so that was part 1. Part 2, what we see next, some strands that I found that I noticed while doing this activity. Straw and hollow men. So obviously there's a lot of that, but just this idea of being a scarecrow, basically this motif of being, this theme of being unable, of someone who is unable to take action because they're hollow, they're stuffed, they're a scarecrow, basically. Empty men, hollow men, we are the stuffed men, leaning together, headpiece filled with straw. Someone who is not able to take action because they are empty. They're not really a human. They're not able to do the things that humans do. They're not able to run, but they're just kind of helpless. And they are kind of at the mercy of the wind, right? Really. So you can read the wind very clearly here as destiny or as life or as just the world in general. And these people, these men in this poem are not able to stand against the wind, but just are blown this way and that way by it. So they're not able to direct their life purpose. They're not able to be the master of their own destiny. They are just kind of at the mercy of their surroundings. And this thing happens and that thing happens and it's for no reason, but it affects them and they have no control. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. They're helpless. They have no control over their lives. Circumstances are completely beyond their control, and they're just hollow men who are sitting there and they are experiencing the effects of things, but they're not able to actually cause anything. They're not actors. They're not participants in their own lives. They're just being affected by other things do things, but they can't do things. Another strand that I noticed was desert imagery. So going along with being unable, it's kind of like the desert is the opposite of fertility, right? So fertility and thinking not just of fertility as in being able to bear children, but also fertility in terms of the economy. Is the economy fertile? Is fertile creativity or intelligence? So just soil can be fertile, right? Or is it barren? So the desert imagery, just overall, everything is dry. Nothing is going to grow here. Nothing is going to be born here. This is a place where all hope is really dead. All hope is lost. There's nothing that can happen here. This is the desert. If you plant a seed, it's not going to grow. Things cannot thrive here. I also noticed some religious imagery. So the concept of heaven and hell throughout, the Lord's Prayer. So more just on impotence, being unable. So I've got 2 categories that are extremely similar. The straw men, the hollow men, the empty men, being unable. That one really goes with the desert imagery and then impotence, so just being unable. We're the straw men, we're the empty men, not lost violent souls, but only as the hollow men, the stuffed men. This is the way the world ends. This is the way the world ends, not with a bang, but a whimper. So if I were going to write a paper on this poem based on this activity that I've just modeled for you, that is the one that I would pick, hands down, for sure. There is so much to say about that. As you can see, like if you're thinking about just how to group things together, you could see an overarching thesis that would link these couple of things. the repetition of the straw and hollow men as a motif, the desert imagery and how those two things are kind of reflecting like the men themselves and the environment that they're in, and what those two things have to do with each other, and then the impotence, just being unable. So both the men and also the land are impotent. They're unable, right? The land cannot produce crops. It's a desert. Nothing can grow here. The men are impotent, as in they're unable to actually take action. They're unable to do things. They are straw men. They are stuffed men. They're hollow. And the world isn't going to end with a bang, but a whimper. So it's not that the world is going to end because with this like big scary like boom ending like the end of a fireworks show, right? Where it's the grand finale and everything is so sparkling and ooh and ah and wow, like can you believe that everything just crashed and burned in destruction? That's not going to be the end. It's going to be a quiet ending. It's going to be a sigh, and that is sad, right? That's at least how the impression that I got from reading this poem is just like defeat, right? It's not going to be like this grand finale. It's just going to be this sad wasting away in the wasteland. So there's not going to be like this like final raging against the dying of the lights, to quote Dylan Thomas in his infamous poem. But it's just going to be not with a bang, but a whimper. So we don't even have any fight left in us. We can't even rage against the dying of the light. We can't even put on one last effort. We're just here, and we're gonna sigh, and we're gonna whimper, and then we're gonna be over, and we're gonna, our straw is gonna blow away in the breeze, and that's it. So next up, contrast and binary opposites. Eyes and sightlessness was an obvious one that stuck out, being able to see versus not being able to see, and life and death. So life is very long is one line in there, and a lot of lines about death and dying. References and allusions, the Lord's Prayer, children's rhymes, from books, Mr. Kurtz is Dead, from Joseph Conrad, Heart of Darkness. Okay, so that is what I found in my investigation of steps 1 through 5 on this particular poem. Another thing that you can do as you're approaching analysis is to ask questions, like to begin with questions rather than an answer. So here are a couple of questions that I might ask about this particular text if I were going to write a paper on it. What specifically is the text about? So what is the purpose of the text? What is the context of the text? So texts don't just spring up fully formed. They're not formed in a vacuum. Someone created them, and for some reason. So is it to solve a problem? Is it to raise awareness about something? Is it to summarize someone else's idea? So what is the purpose of this poem, and how can you tell? Another question that you could ask about any text when you're going to analyze it is, who is the author? So this goes back to the rhetorical triangle that Aristotle came up with, is the relationship of the text in and of itself, to the author, to the audience. So who created that? What did they intend from the text? As well as how do we interpret the text? So author intention versus reader interpretation, which may or may not be the same thing. So sometimes an author will create a text with the intention of it coming off a certain kind of way, and people will get that from it. And other times they totally won't, right? So maybe somebody creates a work that is meant to be quite serious, but maybe it's a painting and it's painted with like stick figures, and it's meant to be very serious, a commentary on just our primitive emotions or something like that as humans. And maybe people think it's funny because it seems kind of cartoonish, so they just misinterpret that work. Or it could be the opposite. Maybe it's meant to be funny, but people just don't get it. They don't understand that sense of humor, and so they see it to be serious, even though it's not meant to be taken that way. So those are just a couple of examples, but thinking always in your questions about what did the author intend, and what do I as the reader or what my other readers interpret from this? So who is the author? Who is the intended audience? Who was this poem written for? How do we know that? And then finally, one other thing that you can do when you're preparing to analyze, well, not just one other thing, one tip I'll leave you with before closing this video out that you could do is to write the main idea on the side of each paragraph or each section. So especially if you're really having trouble grasping the themes or grasping the overall concept of a particular text, and I use the word text because, again, traditionally it could be a piece of writing, but it also could be anything. It could be an advertisement. It could be a video game. It could be a documentary. So something you could do is just write out the main ideas of each section, and then you can go through and practice this on it. So that's particularly handy if it is like a documentary or a song, something where you don't have the text that you can highlight it. You could actually just write out the main idea of each section, and then you'll start to notice the repetition and notice the strands and that kind of thing. So thank you for watching this video. I hope that it was helpful to you. Take good care, and if you have any questions, feel free to send me an email and ask. Have a great rest of your day, and good luck on your next essay. And again, do let me know if you have any questions.